Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I am joined today by Val Forgett of Navy Arms. And your father, Val Forgett
Junior. Yeah, I'm the third. Yeah.
You've told me, he cleared Bannerman Island.
Correct.
So we have a previous video talking a little bit about who Francis Bannerman was and the importance to the modern collecting industry. But in the 1950s, Bannerman had died and his family sold his island
Correct.
to the state of New York.
Correct.
And there was a lot of stuff on it.
Correct. So the Bannerman family had decided to sell the island to the state of New York, but that one of the predicates to sale was that the island had to be completely cleared of ordnance. So originally the Bannerman family contacted the U.S. military, specifically Aberdeen Proving Grounds, and the Army explained to the Bannerman family that they didn't do that type of work, but that my father during the Korean War was stationed at Aberdeen Proving Grounds, and they said that Val is qualified to do it and to contact him. So my father went out to clear the island, or to evaluate the island. He said it was a complete mess. There was picric acid, there was oozing. I mean, it was just every nightmare you could think of. So he came up with a price that he thought it would cost to clear the island. But the year before that, he had gone to Europe for a tour of all of the European gun manufacturers. He went to Birmingham, England, to Saint Etienne, to Liège, to Gardone, and to see all of these gun makers. And my father, Navy Arms is well known for replicas, and the first replica he did was the 51 Navy revolver, which is the gun he wanted to reproduce. And to make a long story short, he found two engineers from Beretta named Aldo Uberti and Vito Gregorelli who were willing to do the guns, but they said that it would cost $5 a gun. He had, on 1,000 guns, they needed the $5,000. Well, $5,000 in 1957, bought a house. It was a lot of money, which of course my father didn't have. So to bring it back to Bannerman's, he came up with his cost to clear the island, and then he just said, to heck with it, I'm going to add $5,000 and submitted, thinking there's no way they were going to do this. Plus, he said the job was insanely dangerous. Well, lo and behold, they went ahead and the Bannerman family accepted his offer, and he ended up spending a summer with a number of workers clearing the island of all the ordnance off, as well as, because of the fact that he was a historian, he went into the home and kept files of the Bannermans that had things like the catalogs, like the customer lists, all of the interesting things that guys like you and I enjoy looking at today as part of the whole history of Bannermans.
Yeah. So clearing this island is in fact what financed Navy Arms' start of making reproduction cowboy revolvers,
which is something not well known. And my
really
father, being the typical guy, he never really publicized that, but that is how he got the $5,000 to start it.
Nice.
And there's a video he made for the Armored Arms Club of New York where he details how he cleared the island. It's a phenomenal video as a standalone itself, and is also part of another video that was done by an Academy Award nominated documentarian, guy by the name of Bailey Sillick. Bailey grew up 5 blocks from the Bannerman store in New York, and Bailey normally would do videos for Steven Spielberg, for NASA, and he did that as a labor of love, and that is a phenomenal video as well.
Okay. So we don't have the rights to reproduce the documentary.
No.
The full documentary.
No.
But what we do have is your dad's talk to the Arms and Armor Club.
Correct.
And so we're just going to roll that right in. That's 40 minutes of him explaining what went into clearing out a castle full of palms, basically.
Pretty much. And you will notice a vague family resemblance of me and my father, because my father was about my age when he did that video.
All right, well, let's go ahead and roll that. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. Thank you very much for watching.
Thanks.
I was approached by, I think it was Frank Bannerman. In the late 50s, I'd gotten out of the Army. Among other aspects of my training, I was an explosive ordnance demolition, quote, expert. But my hobby was the Civil War and old and unusual ammunition. I spent 2 years at Aberdeen Proving Ground in the Ordnance Museum working under, I believe, the greatest man that ever lived when it comes to knowing arms, ammunition, explosives, Colonel Jarrett. And he taught me an awful lot. And when they were going to sell the island to the state of New York, the state of New York said, hey, there's still an awful lot of explosives on that island. You have to clean everything off before we'll buy it. So they contacted the Army, Navy, and Air Force, all of their explosive ordnance units. They all refused. They said, we're not going to do it. We know somebody crazy enough to do it, and that's Val Forgett. So they contacted me, we went over, we cut a deal, and I was to go up, and I spent a summer on the island, combing it from one end to the other, tracking down all the artillery shells that had blown all over, going through the castle, digging out shells from the Civil War through the Spanish-American War that were laying everywhere, that were rotting, that were oozing explosives. Most of it was the old picric acid and the brown flake powder. Now, picric acid is probably the most unstable explosive known. And we got away with what we did. And we cleaned off the island. The island today is a shambles. The buildings are burned, ruined, and basically, Bannerman's was founded in 1865 on Bergen Street in Brooklyn, New York. The first catalog came out in 1884. And I'm going to give you tonight some of the early reminiscences of David Bannerman about the beginning of the company. He says, my first recollection of anything about the business was in Bergen Street, Brooklyn in the early 80s. We had a small house with a large yard, about 100 by 200 feet, with a stable in the rear. Also, large open front shed. In this were piled hundreds of cases filled with obsolete Civil War U.S. oval belt plates. These had brass fronts with heavy lead backs. They were put in a smelter right there. The lead ran into pigs and the brass in barrels. As I recollect, it was a very profitable undertaking. What they did is they took a belt buckle that would bring $300 today and realized about 7/10 of an ounce, of 7/10 of a dollar in scrap. From Bergen Street, we moved to Sterling Place. Here we had half of a double house with large fenced-in yard where we stored Civil War cannon carriages, caissons, traveling blacksmith shops. In our front yard, we had a mounted Civil War cannon on field carriage, which we fired on national holidays. My father's office was at time 1885 here, with most of the stock at 14 Atlantic Avenue, owned by my Uncle William, who still carried on the original ship chandlery business started before the Civil War by my grandfather. From here, we issued the first catalog in 1888. This was printed without illustrations showing the different items, but without prices. These were filled by hand, filled in by hand for different customers, dealers and retailers, and my job was to fill in different prices before mailing. The business had moved to 118 Broad Street in New York near South Ferry. For a while, I was a messenger there during vacations. Later, we moved to 27 Front Street, where we had the whole building with much more room for storage and display. From Front Street, we went to 579 Broadway, where we had a block-long store. Then in 1905, we purchased the famous store at 501 Broadway. In 1900, we found that with ammunition from the government sales in Cuba was necessary to buy a secluded storage place outside the city. We found Palopal Island in the Hudson River, about near West Point, could be bought, and in November of 1900, we made the purchase and at once began the storage buildings. To the island, we shipped direct from government arsenals, also from our 2 warehouses in Erie Base in Brooklyn, and with deep water docks, we could handle any shipment with much time saving. Since 1918, when my father died, I have been in business with my brother Frank until 1945 when he died. I remember at the close of the Civil War making the highest bid at a government sale on a lot of 11,000 old guns. Veterans of many wars, part of a lot surrendered by General Lee, classified rebel. The U.S. Ordnance Officer refused to accept our bid for the guns, alleging that Bannerman would repair the guns and put them into serviceable order, and they would enter into competition with now obsolete guns that the government had for sale. Things haven't changed. This was the story put forth by a lot of people when they passed the '68 gun control, and right now at Anniston Ordnance Depot, they are destroying guns as far back as 45-70, Spanish-American War guns. They just destroyed 16,000 Springfield rifles from World War I. Nothing changes. So this lot of rebel guns, which contained many heirlooms of patriots who had fought with Washington and Jackson, was consigned to the fire, and the old burnt locks and barrels were sold to us later as scrap iron. Bannerman's greatest coup was the Spanish acquisition. We bought up 90% of all captured guns, ammunition, and other equipment auctioned off after the Spanish-American War. We also bought the weapons directly from Spain's government before it evacuated Cuba. These purchases vastly exceeded the firm's capacity at its store in Manhattan and filled 3 huge Brooklyn warehouses with munitions, including 30 million cartridges. Although the identity of its major munitions customers was a tightly held secret, the firm hotly denied that it ever armed revolutionaries for profit. Yet, when Panamanian rebels broke away from Colombia in 1903, presumably conspiring with the United States government bent on building a canal through Panama, the insurgents were armed with Mausers from Bannerman's. Iran-Contra, almost 100 years before. Again, things never change. Bannerman's Island had quite a history behind it. Just a brief history. Only 3 people ever owned the island. Since the Revolution, the first person to own it was William Van Wyck. The deed refers to the island as Paloiples. William Van Wyck conveyed the island to Walter C. Anthony in the 1888. Later, it was conveyed by Anthony to a Mary G. Taft, wife of Thomas Taft, who sold it to the Bannermans in 1900 and had been in the Bannermans family until sold to the state of New York in the early 60s. Now, the name Palopal, or Polypel, or many others, names that have been given to it, it has many interesting backgrounds. Some called it, said Palopal came from the Dutch because it was shaped like a spoon, and this is the Dutch word for spoon. But it has a humorous little story about it that's been around since the Revolutionary War, and I'd like to just read you that. Probably the best known version of the origin of the name Palopal is the legend of Polypel has appeared in many forms and varieties with essentially the same theme, even where the names of the characters are Dutch. The best account is in Hudson Stories, published by P.G. Putnam and Sons in 1871, which places the famous incident as during or just after the time of the Revolution. As the story goes, Paul Vernon, a young refugee minister from British-held New York, boarded at the Pell Farm on the east side of the river near the island. Now, we had a member of this club by the name of Mr. Pell, who was a direct descendant, and became enamored of Mary Pell. His rival for Mary's hand was her schoolmate, Gert Brinkerhoff. As Gert and Mary started on a long-awaited date for a drive in his sleigh up the frozen river, the young minister warned that the ice would soon break up. The pair went happily off, however, but at dusk, the minister, seeing that the ice was indeed breaking up, skated upstream to warn them. He met them coming back by moonlight, but just in time to cut the horses loose to get home their own way. At that point, the tide turned and swept the ice floes downstream, breaking even smaller as they went. Mary, having given up hope of surviving, confessed to Paul her love for Gert, and the young minister married them and there. Just then, the swirling ice floe, swept by the increasing tide, crashed on the shore of the island and brought all three to the safety of solid rock. Next morning, it appeared that Paul had swum ashore for help, and it was a slave who rowed out to rescue the bride and groom that named the island, till then too small to name, Polypel. And that's how they say the island got its name. Now, we have a map of the island. The original of this drawing came from Sheldon, and George Woodbridge, with his little magic lantern, transformed it to what we have here. And it describes and shows everything on the island: the main gate, the castle, the house, all the powder magazines. And this, I know when we were doing the work on the island, this was all filled in with silt. We'd have to come in this gate and stay close to the wall, come right around, and come right up and dock right in here. This was rotting and falling in. This was all silted in. This barge had sunk. And somewhere in here, there are several cannons in the water because they were unloading a barge and it tipped and dropped the cannons in the water. Still there. And it has a complete description of where the old magazine was, where the powder magazine, and everything else. The island was built starting in 1900, and it was built by itinerant labor. Now, there are many wonderful stories about how Bannerman hired people and everything up there, but the true story is Bannerman went over to the Bowery, which is right around the corner from 501 Broadway, and would hire drunks to go up there and work on the island for slave wages. I spoke to old people up there. They told me the stories. And if you look, I was up there, I started work there in the late 50s. And the island was crumbling. All the cement work was falling apart. You could go up and pick up a piece of the cement and crumble it in your hands. All the outer walls had crumbled. Now, this is cement that was 57 years old. The cement lasts a lot longer than that. And the real story of why the island was falling apart is when he started building his island, he was approached by somebody else, one of his competitors, that was discussing smuggling ammunition to Central America, and asked Bannerman how he did it. And Bannerman said, the way you smuggle ammunition is you buy barrels of cement, you put the bottom half ammunition, the top half cement, and you ship it out as cement. Because of the tremendous weight, your ammunition and cement weigh about the same. So the fellow said, gee, that's a great idea. So he went ahead, put together the shipment, and shipped it out. Somebody told Customs about it. Customs nabbed the shipment. The shipment was put up for sale. Bannerman bought it. Cement and ammunition. He had enough cement to build his island. But the man wasn't that dumb. When he bought the cement, he knew it would never be used, so he bought a condemned lot of cement that would not really last. And the island was built with a condemned lot of cement. And that's why it fell, basically it fell apart. Little stories, you know, the rest of the story. Bannerman lived on the island, built a beautiful home up there. I'll show you after on the slides. Replica of a Scottish house, and the warehouse was a replica of a Scottish castle. In 1918, right at the end of the war, he was arrested by the United States Army and imprisoned on his own island. He had just been operated on for a gallbladder, and he was a very sick man, but he was a feisty old man, and he fought the government, he fought everything, and finally got an apology by the Congress of the United States. But they went up there, they went through all his possessions, they would search him when he went on the island, when he went off the island. They went through his house, his desk, without any search warrants. They abridged every right a man had. And they could do that because he was an arms dealer. And again, things never change. Our government still does it to people. He died in 1918, they say, as a result of this. The business went on, and the island was used as a storage for material, but they never bought much after that. And they stored explosives, and in 1920, there's a tremendous explosion, and I have the newspaper account over here where they said, quotes, 200 pounds of powder exploded and blew artillery shells all over the island, out into the river, and blew a section of stone wall across 300 yards of water onto the New York Central Railroad tracks. Now, you people here that know explosives know it takes a lot more than 200 pounds of powder to blow a brick wall over 300 yards of water and onto the railroad tracks. We have no idea how much, but the whole arms magazine vanished, just vanished. And there's shells all over the island. And what I'd like to do now is to go into the slides and go through that, explain exactly what we have here. The first slide is Bannerman's Island as you approach it from the east. The second one is a view of the island showing the Bannerman Island marking on it, and this is what you would see when you come down on the New York Central Railroad. Here you have a view from one of the upper floors of the warehouse, and those little bastions there, at one time there were Gatling guns mounted in there just for decoration. Another view to show the height of the castle. I believe was seven floors high. Very impressive. Just all of the gingerbread and everything else on it. This is leading, I believe, to the caretaker's house. And I remember years later going on the island after it had burned, and everyone said that there's nothing left on the island. And the caretaker's house hadn't burned. We walked in there, and there's an old machine shop. And I reached up on top of an oily, dirty shelf and took off an absolutely mint Borman fuse, marked Borman fuse wrench, marked State of New Jersey, probably worth $250 today, still laying up there. And there's still material up there, I bet. This shows the portcullis, and looking down from the warehouse down to the capstan that was off the Olympia. Another shot showing the general architecture of the castle. Here we have Sheldon in his hard hat standing by the portcullis. This would be when, the late 60s?
Yes, well, early 60s.
Early 60s. Okay, there I am surveying what has to be done, saying, good God, what a mess. Because everywhere you looked, there were artillery shells, rotting, oozing, some broken open with powder laying there. Here we are, we have moved out of the main castle. On the left-hand side, these are canisters of 2-pounder Hotchkiss shells, all of them point detonating high explosive. On the right are 1-pounder Hotchkiss shells, base detonating high explosive. And there's our landing barge that we would load them on, take them down to Cold Spring Harbor, right in the middle of town, unload them, bring in a tractor-trailer truck, and load them on the tractor-trailer truck and take them across the ferry without placards. We removed them to Pennsylvania, where we had a better facility for unloading a lot of the ammunition. A lot of the ammunition was unloaded on the island, but we were approaching the end of the summer, and we had to get it all off there. And there's 40,000 rounds of high explosive ammunition in original crates that was safe to move and safe to handle. So we decided to move it. If you'll see the landing barge, on the right-hand side you see the ramp on the front. This we had fastened in the up position. But one day we're busy loading shells and somebody threw 1 or 2 cases against the ramp, jarred it loose. The landing barge started to sink with all of the ammunition on it, and I had to hop on with a hammer and some rags and pound them into the open holes to keep it from sinking, pump it out, get it going again, and it was quite an adventure. This will give you an idea of what you could find on the island. Not only shells, but there's a very nice cannon. And George Woodbridge over here said just before that he'd sell his soul for a 3-inch ordnance rifle. Well, George, there's one just laying there, just with plants growing around it. This was up by the house. Here we're moving carriages for Krupp cannons off the island. And if you look in the boxes in front, they're all artillery accessories and tools. And you can see how close you are to the eastern shore of it. This is what it was like inside the castle. They had a caretaker there that had a problem with alcohol. He would, anything that was brass, he would sell for scrap at a local scrapyard and buy what he needed. On the floor we found parts of probably 10 or 12 Gatling guns that had been smashed apart for the brass on them. We found the bolts, the barrels, the frames, the cams, and everything else for the guns. And I asked him, what happened to the guns? He said, oh, well, we needed the brass. And he just kind of kicked one of the bolts and said that was it. Here you have cases broken open, and those are barrels for flintlock pistols, thousands of them. The guns had been burned, and the barrels were filled, the boxes were filled with just the barrels, and other boxes were filled with the locks. All of the brass work had been sold for scrap. This is some of the material the government burned. Here you have carriages just standing up against the wall for Gatling guns, cannons, a little bit of everything. Everywhere you turned, there are things that nowadays that you just couldn't believe. This was the wheel room. Hundreds of wheels for Gatling guns, 6-pounder cannons, 12-pounder cannons. One room of nothing but wheels. Here you have boxes broken open with bayonets, bayonet scabbards all over the floor. Just things piled everywhere, broken, falling all over. 7 floors of this. And you had to go through every bit of it, because you never know when you'd find a live artillery round or a case of 12-pound spherical case shot, red hot and ready to go. I know that they all function because years later we had a case of ammunition we took up to West Point, and we did a record for Mercury Records with George Woodbridge. We filed original Civil War ammunition, and it all functioned. Here we are loading some material on the dock. In the foreground you see a carriage for an artillery piece. On the left-hand side there's a cannon jack. Now, we all have a jack for our car, but during the Civil War they had cannon jacks. And I guess that's the only surviving one. It's still in my collection, but it's pictured in Mordecai on all the accessories for cannon. And I think it's probably the only one known. Cases of port fires Directly in the center, cases of cannon fuses. And there I am without a shirt on, black as the ace of spades, holding up a, looks like a little cannon carriage or limber. There's Admiral Farragut's gun from the Hartford that was on the island, and piled all around it are grates from hotshot furnaces. There are carriages. Along the wall, there are broken cases of artillery shells. In the water, there are artillery shells in 2 and 3 feet of water. We had to fish them all out. This is another shot of the gun. This will show you some of the debris piled out there of cases of ammunition after the magazine blew up. They dumped all of the shells out in this section of the island. There you see a 2-pounder Hotchkiss cannon, brand new in the original crate. On the right-hand side is an empty crate, or I call it a coffin, that once held a baby Gatling gun. Brand new. Smashed for scrap. Now tonight we have with us one of the outstanding dealers in fine American arms, Dave Condon. And Dave, what would you say a mint bulldog in its original box would bring today? $350,000 to $400,000. We're talking $350,000 to $400,000. That's why I call it a coffin. Every time I look at this picture, I want to cry. These are buckets, grease buckets and water buckets for Civil War artillery cannon. Nowadays, if somebody finds one, it's a rare treasure, a picture in a gun catalog, valued $250 to $500. There are hundreds of them piled in one room, pile 8 or 9 feet high. Some of them absolutely brand new. You can see on the left-hand side still with the black paint on them. This is showing the dock. Again, a work area showing the canisters, the boxes that we broke them out of so we could transport the canisters easier. Here I am in one of the upper floors with a flashlight in my hand, checking everything. It was so dirty and so hot and so filthy, working all summer. That's when I weighed 145 pounds. I must have lost 20 pounds that summer. But that'll give you an idea what it's like inside. Everywhere you looked, nowadays you look upon this stuff and wow, great collector's item. There are artillery, rammers, sponges, worms, just thrown all over the floor in one of the rooms. As another outside, as we've started to find all the shells and bring them together, we piled them up against the wall of the old magazine to start checking them. Cannonballs. There are shells for 3-inch ordnance rifles, Parrott guns, hundreds and hundreds of Civil War artillery shells, every one of them loaded and dangerous. The round cannonballs you see there were probably spherical case. And to give you an idea, at this period there was a relic collector in Virginia that found one of them outside of Petersburg. His name was Campbell, and he used to go to all of the Virginia shows, and he decided he was going to unload it. And he sat on top of it with an electric drill and was drilling a hole in it, and he was going to pour kerosene in it. Well, the shell went off while he was sitting on it and literally blew his bottom off. He lived, survived, but this is not the way to deactivate a Civil War shell. They are still, quote, armed and dangerous to this day. This is another area where we unloaded a lot of the ammunition that we were afraid to move. We brought it in and stacked it in this area. We had a table, and if you look in the foreground, on the table is laying an original Civil War fuse wrench. we had a lot of the original equipment that they used for taking apart ammunition available to us on the island. This is an overall view showing the dock loaded with material being prepared to move out on the landing barge that we used to be taken apart. The ammunition was ultimately disassembled. All of the cases went to Columbia Brass Works in Pennsylvania, and the bands were cut off the shells. The shells were all taken apart. The powder was sold to Colonial Williamsburg, and the steel, of course, went to the scrap dealer. Every bit of it was taken apart and scrapped. This will show you some of the upper floors of the castle to show you that there was no lights. We operated by flashlight, portable generator, and by guess and by God, walking on some areas of the floors that were rotted through, that you had to be very careful that where you step, because certain areas you could fall right through the floor to the next floor below you, because the roof leaked and rotted out the certain sections of the castle. This is a picture showing a lot of the cannon carriages and carriage parts just down in one of the areas we call the dungeon. Here we have rotting Civil War knapsacks, and part of the floor just rafters at the very top. And just had to go through everything, burrow through everything, and check it. Tin cups, Civil War tin cups, bright, shiny, and new. Nowadays at a Gettysburg souvenir shop, $150 to $200. There were thousands of them everywhere. Civil War canteens. We were discussing it before. Sheldon Stowe remembers as a young boy, we would scale them out into the Hudson River and then shoot at them and sink them, because there are between 10 and 20,000 on the island. Piles of Civil War knapsacks, the tarred knapsacks. Had to go through everything, check under the piles. We'd find cases of ammunition stored everywhere. Sword scabbards, thousands of them, rusting away in a corner for cavalry and artillery swords, all Civil War. Pith helmets, thousands of them in original boxes on the upper floors. Some of the cases good, others where the roof leaked, rotten and moldy. As you see, right there, brand new ones. All summer, everyone wore a pith helmet to keep cool in the sun. A new one every day. New York State militia helmets, complete with the brass shields. Nowadays, $500, $600 for a complete one in good condition. Thousands of them there. A lot of them in good shape, a lot of them wet and rotted. The capstan from the Hartford, that was one of the landmark pieces on the island. When you'd land, this is the first thing you'd see. This is the castle after it burned, showing just the walls. And on the right-hand side, if you look at the old Bannerman's catalog, they call it a faggot burner. I was just discussing with George after that, before that, things have changed. We call different things different nowadays. But a faggot was a knot in a piece of pine wood that they would cut out, put in there, and light, and it would burn for hours to give light. That's from a 15th century Scottish castle. It's still there. Someday I'd like to figure out how to get it down. And this shows the castle after it's been burned. Extremely dangerous, because you never know when a wall or a section will collapse. And that's what it looks like today. In the very beginning, I showed you what it looked like in all its grandeur. Today, it's a burned out hulk, like a tired old ship, just sitting there waiting to die. the inside to show how it was built. The gutted remains of once a glorious storehouse containing millions of rounds of ammunition, the most wonderful collectible memorabilia in the world. And that's Bannerman's Island as it is today. An overgrown castle, burned out, just sitting there, too dangerous to let anyone on it because of what's left of the island. And there you see a scene from the Upper Hudson. And that is the story of the island. Clearing of the island, at the time, I thought was fun. And my last memories of the island were the last day we were there to clean it up. My agreement with the Bannermans is I would give my word that there were no explosives left on the island. And walking down to the boat, just the sun, it was just getting late in the day, there had always been two huge naval shells that were probably as tall as this room, as little landmarks there. And I looked at the shells and I said to myself, God, they can't be loaded. But I said, I have to check because there were ornaments, there were monuments. As you saw, 140-pound Val, scrambled up it. I'm there, arm around it. A friend of mine tossed me up a Stilson wrench, unscrew the brass fuse. Threw it down, they threw me up a flashlight, I looked down inside, they were loaded. Getting late, my last day, the edge of the river, I slid down, went to the other one, scrambled up, didn't give a damn, big Stilson wrench on the fuse, threw the fuse in the river, slid down, and we pushed them, splash, into the river. I think the statute of limitations is over for pollution. And we dumped the artillery shells in the river, let the water come in with the powder, totally inert. And with their weight and with the silt there, it's probably 25 feet of silt, they probably just settled down through the mud and disappeared forever. Got in the boat, went away from one of the most memorable experiences I've ever had in my life. Lived to survive to do it, look back on it, would never do it again, and just a lot of fun and stupid things you do when you're young. Thank you.